Good day. In this video, I'm going to help you to pick the best questions to ask your interviewers towards the end of your performance, right? And I'm going to start by presenting you with some examples of these interview questions, and I'm going to structure them by row. Okay, so one question for each row. Let's start with the recruiter or the HR types of questions, right? And I believe here a strategy you might want to employ would be to reverse the types of questions they ask you, or they are most likely to ask you in job interviews. Okay, so a super common interview question from HR can be, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Okay, so you could also consider asking them the same question towards the end of your job interview, right? The second role would be with the hiring manager. Okay, so what would be an interesting question you might ask a hiring manager? I believe here, reversing the types of questions they might ask is not necessarily the best thing, because they would ask you more of tell me about the time or behavioral types of questions. But what if you ask them something on the lines of, is this a new or a replacement role? And if it's a replacement role, why did the other person leave? Okay, so this will give you some hopefully useful insight if this was a replacement role, or as if it's a new role, then chances are, that's very much to your advantage as the business is expanding, right? If it's a replacement role, maybe they will give you something interesting, some metrics that they would be interested in the ideal candidate that they're looking for, right? The third type of person you could interview with would be directors. Okay, so directors or executives in particular ask types of questions around metrics and numbers, KPIs, right? So if they ask you such interview questions during these interviews, you could also reverse the same approach and ask them questions such as, is it possible to define success for these roles? What KPIs do you use to measure one's accomplishment, right? So if they like numbers and metrics, and executives and directors do, then why not asking them a question that implies metrics and KPIs, all right? The fourth scenario would be with a skip manager, someone who's at least two levels above you. Okay, so what is some interesting questions you might want to ask them? And in my experience, I would advise you to ask positively framed questions, easy questions they would enjoy answering. What do you like the most? What do you like best about working here? Right, would be an easy question for them to ask. This would be my advice, right? And finally, with a coworker, number 5. What types of questions they might ask you? Well, it depends very much on the role that you're applying for. If it's a highly technical role, that your coworker would be a highly technical person, then they might ask you something on the lines of, what's your most interesting project, right? If they ask you what's your most interesting project, you could also consider a question such as, what important initiatives have you been working on, or are you working on in the next 6 or 12 months, right? So this reversal approach to reverse the types of questions they ask you could also be something interesting. Or how do you like to collaborate on a team, right? Whether you like working in teams, you could also spin it with something on lines, what do you think the secret sauce for success in your team is right now? Okay, so this reversal of the types of questions they might ask you, as you can see, works quite well with the variety of these roles, right? Now, the second thing I wanted to point out when it comes to asking the best possible questions towards the end of your job interview would be to make it a blend of two aspects. First, you prepare your questions. You're going to be interviewing with them. You prepare a number of questions for them, right? But the second half of this equation would be to decide what questions would be the most appropriate to ask them based on how your conversation, based on how your interview evolves, right? So you could even follow up subtly in questions for them to clarify something that you felt wasn't or may have been misunderstood about your performance during your job interview, right? It won't always work, but some people also do prefer to use this time, especially, because interviews are trending nowadays to be more concise towards the 30 minutes mark versus the 60 minutes mark. Okay, so if you have less time to interview with them, you might as well use this time wisely to get more insight as to how they perceive their performance and to further bias them towards you if you can, right? So half before your interview and half during your interview when it comes to choosing the best possible questions. And last but not least, some mistakes that I would like to advise you to avoid, of the types of questions I don't believe are most appropriate, right? For example, asking your skip or someone higher up a very negatively framed question, or such as, what do you like the least about working here? I believe, interacting with these executives you should always trend towards a positive experience as much as possible, right? I believe this is the stuff that sells you best. And the other thing you want to avoid would be asking a recruiter for too much insight. So how do I stack up against other candidates? In my experience, recruiters will not appreciate these things. In particular, better focus with the questions I presented you with the typical HR questions or with easy, positively framed questions, because recruiters are not very keen to give you too much insight into the process, and there's many candidates trying to overdo this, trying to get as much insight as possible, and this can backfire as well. But long story short, picking the best possible questions for them for the purpose of job interviews can make your performance to significantly improve, and some of these questions, some of these interactions can easily make you a more memorable candidate and therefore optimize your chances for success. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.